listening to the HWP Report, bringing you news and information about issues pertaining to health, wellness, and performance, with your host, Dr. Faiz Kirsten.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this podcast of the Health Wellness Performance Institute. The Institute merges root cause medicine with edu-empowerment programs, thereby helping people to prevent and reverse chronic illness and to optimize their health and wellness. Our 3-month program focuses largely on assisting patients who have been experiencing ongoing struggles with cancer, autoimmune diseases, and neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease and dementia, amongst others. We do, however, also assist patients with other chronic diseases such as diabetes and hypertension, for example, and who are interested in reversing these conditions. The Institute also offers various health and wellness products and educational courses. The links to our online store, HWP Natural Farmacy, and the Health Wellness Performance Institute are below. All right, so welcome everybody, and welcome to this podcast of the HWP Report. And today I'm in discussion with two colleagues and friends, Mr. Amin Abrams and Mr. Pete. I won't give his surname because he wants to remain anonymous. All right, so we're going to be talking about technocracy and how we can get out of the technocratic state. And I'm going to start off by talking about technocracy in healthcare, just briefly. Not in depth. There's lots of information out there, and I may cover this specific topic in a specific podcast on this issue, okay? So I was in practice for almost 10 years, not far from where I'm living right now. And as I was running my general practice, I realized, my life was being controlled by the medical aids, and that was in the 90s. It was a real nightmare trying to get your money from the medical aids every month because there was no contract, and I don't know if there are contracts now, there probably are, with doctors who have agreements with medical aids now, but way back then, I never had any agreement with any medical aid. So they could pay you whenever they wanted to. They were the third-party payer in the system. So it's a weird system where you as a doctor sees a patient, but a third party is responsible for paying the doctor for that transaction. It doesn't happen in the normal retail system where you go into a shop and somebody else pays for the transaction, but it happens in healthcare. So anyway, and because when I left practice at the end of my 1999, I went and did a business administration degree, and I realized the kind of power that administrators had over doctors and patients through the medical aid system, or they call it medical insurance in other parts of the world. But anyway, I submitted a paper to the Medical Association in 2005. I analyzed this entire system from the primary healthcare perspective, and I submitted a paper to the Medical Association here in South Africa. I described the entire system from my analysis perspective, and I put forward a proposal, because I realized that really doctors had no future. They were doing the work, but they weren't responsible for getting paid by their patients, or the patient wasn't responsible for paying them. Some other third party was. So I developed a model where you cut out the third party payer, and you just, it's the patient that's responsible for paying the doctor. But I didn't hear anything from the Medical Association for 3 months, and then they said I should go and speak to the Health Professions Council, which I thought wasn't appropriate. What would the Health Professions Council tell me? So I left it at that. And funnily enough, last year, actually, for some reason, I actually then mentioned that to the Health Professions Council. Some other issue arose, and I mentioned that to the Health Professions Council. That was many years later, of course, that's 2019, compared to 2005, way back then. But they also ignored me. So basically, and I understand why, because the healthcare system is controlled by corporate interests. It's a corporate system, okay? And I was proposing something outside of that system, something outside of the technocratic system. That's basically what I was proposing. And my proposal, my model, basically then morphed into another model, which is now housed in something called the Health Wellness and Performance Institute, or the Health Wellness Performance Institute. So I have a model for delivery of primary health care, which basically is outside of the technocratic system. So technocracy in healthcare doesn't feature in my model. Okay, I'm not going to go through that model. I'm just giving my fellow attendees here some background as to how I came to understand what is going on in the system, in the healthcare system. I didn't know the term technocracy way back then in 1999 and beyond, up until 2005 when I submitted the paper to the Medical Association. But I do understand the term technocracy now, and certainly technocrats are controlling everything today. And the world is moving towards technocratic police state, which basically we're going to be controlled by technocracy, and specifically AI-driven technology is going to be driving and controlling our lives, which is already happening, but it's going to get way, way much worse than what it's actually we're experiencing right now. So in a nutshell, that's basically how I came to understand what's going on. And then as the years went on, I got to know the term technocracy, and I realized now that it was basically technocrats controlling the healthcare system. So people who are interested in learning more about the medical aid system and how their lives are controlled, and basically you lose all the time as a patient paying money to a medical aid system. Unless you're a chronically ill patient is in and out of hospital, you may sort of win on the financial side, you know, in some sense, but you don't win on your own health side. But if you're a healthy person and you're not really chronically ill and you're paying money every month to a medical aid fund, you just basically losing. You're basically throwing that money away. You might as well buy gold and keep it, and I promise you that money will grow in value over the years, rather than just throwing it away and giving it to a medical aid system. You're basically just enriching the technocrats. So in a nutshell, that's basically the background and my understanding of how technocracy in healthcare. Obviously, there's much more to the subject, but I will cover this maybe in a podcast later on. Okay, guys, if you guys have anything to add there, then we can continue.
No, nothing from me.
Okay, Amin?
No, I just want to say, I think my understanding of technocracy is that, you know, it's sort of, you know, just with the advancement of technology, you know, now becoming more sort of, you know, or more ramped up and more fast paced. I think that technocracy also has a tendency to sort of, you know, monopolize on certain sort of technical skills, you know. So you know, especially in the workforce now, we see a lot of traditional skills and roles become more redundant as technology also now becomes more ramped up and new technology becomes available. You know, along comes with, you know, sort of new skills as well. And there's this big sort of void being left now, where a lot of the traditional blue collar work now also going to be made redundant. And that's also now a big part of you know, how how it will affect the economy, you know, going forward. So yeah, just wanted to add that point as well.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So Pete. Okay. So Pete doesn't have anything to add there. So basically, we can move then on to the Derek Rose's book on how to opt out of the technocratic state. And if you guys, I have. In healthcare, you know, my model for the Health Wellness Performance Institute is outside of technocracy, like I said. Then also in 2003, we set up a community exchange system, which is basically a trading platform using virtual currency. So you don't use your conventional fiat currency, whether it's paper or digital. It's outside of the conventional banking system, outside of the monetary system. And you trade on a platform using the currency called talents. It's just basically a debit and credit system, you know, like other systems are, basically banking systems. So those are my contributions to trying to solve this issue in healthcare and in finance and economics. Yeah. So Pete, so maybe we can discuss Derek Rose's book now. If you guys want to bring up any issues pertaining to that book specifically, we can go for that.
Yeah, I think just coming back to a question I had earlier, you know, so what are the solutions then, you know, to sort of escape this whole technocratic system that seems to be inevitably sort of upon us? You know, how do we go about, you know, breaking away? You know, I've actually read 2 parts of the book, and they speak about counter economics and agorism. So can you maybe sort of just elaborate a bit more on that? I have some specific questions to that, but maybe you want to talk about some of the solutions that the book speaks on.
Well, throughout the years, people have always asked me, Dr. Kirsten, what's the solution? What's the solution? And on the radio, I'd actually been giving them the solutions, but they kept asking, what's the solutions? But ultimately, the ultimate solution, the only thing that, the parting point, let me put it that way, is your mind, okay? That's the beginning part, not the parting point, but the beginning point is your own mind. It's your consciousness, right? If your consciousness is not at the level that it should be, then the actual nitty-gritty solution is not going to make any sense to you, all right? So you got to start with your consciousness. If you have a low level of awareness of what's going on in the world, then it's difficult to even explain to you, the details of the solutions. It's difficult to explain to you the economic solutions that I just mentioned, the healthcare solutions. That's why most people didn't understand what I was talking about over the years, because they were so indoctrinated in the system that to talk about something other than a medical aid, something outside of the corporate system, most people still can't understand it today. If you talk about a common law system, a voluntary association, not a medical aid, a corporate medical aid, most people don't understand that, so because their consciousness is so low. So you've got to start with by raising your level of consciousness. Obviously, it takes a lot of knowledge and understanding. And then your spiritual consciousness also, not just your thought consciousness, not just being aware of your internal environment and your external environment, but your connection with a higher power, the highest power, You've got to be aware of that also, which a lot of people actually are not, unfortunately. So that's the beginning point. Then you talk about the nitty-gritty solutions, okay, whether it's in finance, healthcare, whatever, economics, law. And Derek Brose's book, I think, is mainly a lot about economics, counter economics, economics outside of the stated system, outside of the corporate system. So as I said, the solution that we came up with, which is part of the solution, not the whole solution, is trading on a platform outside of the conventional corporate system. And it's in existence. I mean, there's many trading platforms now, community exchanges all around the world, many actually. So that is one way of actually getting around this coming economic crash that's going to happen. People's money is going to be worth nothing. And trading on the platform is a great idea, because you don't need fiat currency. You don't have gold or Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Although this body data chip that they're introducing now, they want to introduce and put implants in everybody's bodies, is a cryptocurrency-based device. So you'll only get cryptocurrency if you're a good person, and you've got enough social credits, put it that way. And then you can trade with the cryptocurrency that they'll give you on their blockchain. You can trade. If you're not a good person and you don't have enough social credits to be given cryptocurrency, then you can't trade, you can't buy, you can't sell, you can't work, you can't do anything. You're basically dead, okay? Unless your family supports you. So that's the system that's coming. So we need to get out of that system. And obviously you need to prevent yourself from getting vaccinated or chipped. You don't want to be chipped, okay? So it's a big fight. It's going to happen. This is the reality we're faced with. Very evil stuff, as we were speaking about earlier on. So that's what we need to do. So counter economics, then you've got to get out of the economic system, which I just now explained. I don't know if Peter has any other ideas on what other ways we can use to get out of the system. Look, basically the best thing to do is, besides raising your level of consciousness, is to leave the city, get off the grid, and go to the remote countryside, as they say. But that's not an easy thing to do. I've been trying that for years, trying to get a group together, and groups don't gel. They don't, people have different ideas, different philosophies, and you just don't get on anymore. And so for me, it was very difficult getting a group together over the years, or being part of a group and trying to get groups together. It just didn't work. So looks like we're stuck in the city. And so we got to develop strategies to counter the technocratic state while living in the city. I know Pete's on a farm somewhere, but I don't know how he finds it there. Pete, how's it going on that side?
So, just to chip in, one has to look at the ways in which we are reliant on certain things to get our needs met. And there's always going to be a trade-off between our, the benefit privileges that are offered through decentralized systems, and the ones that come with taking full responsibility and then having understanding of what our motives are and the degree to which we want comfort and entertainment and so on, vis-a-vis the empowerment that comes with learning new skills and making things and doing things oneself. No man is an island, as they also say, and I think as in the book they talk about developing freedom cells, and what he's talking about is the optimum number of 8 people working collaboratively together and forming cells is in like a body with different functions and parts, but to meet the needs that communities do best, and that's shared around a set of values and objectives. So what we fail to often recognize is that we lose our liberty and our freedom when we rely on someone else. And in this sense, the state, which is a corporate fiction, which has no real individual concern to our liberties and freedoms and alienable rights. And, it might have that pretext or pretense to be interested in our personal liberties and freedoms in the preamble of the Constitution and Bill of Rights and so on, but it's actually just it's largely a farce. And so with the trade-off of our liberties and freedoms under the guise of greater security and protection and convenience that these organized systems provide, what the technocracy is creating is less scope and chance to back out all these systems, to the point whereby there's point of no return. We just cannot get away, and we have some Orwellian dystopia of being told how to behave through soft coercion, that carrot stick kind of idea, that the police can come knock on your door, or potentially you get denied access to the things you actually desire or need as a necessity for your living. As we see is the case in China, where they've already started testing out a lot of these things under the, where most of the globalist things are being tested. So people are being denied airplane tickets or tickets onto bullet trains because they have been misbehaving according to a set of indices that have been prescribed by the state, by the social engineers. Henry Kissinger in the 1970s stated something, and it's always rung, it's always remained in my mind. And he said, to control people, you control their food. To control continents, you control energy, and to control the world, you control finance. And that's obviously underpinned by a legal system of, what we think of as being moral, right, wrong, and so on. And so I've often gauged my sort of motives to remaining and benefiting from the organized availability of food, energy, finance, and so on, but not being enslaved by it. And so in our current condition in South Africa, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of desperation and so on, and we all feel it, but we're feeling it to different degrees, because we're on a scale from complete codependence to independence. And I advocate an interdependence, as in any relationship, one whereby we're not completely enslaved or codependent, but also we don't necessarily have to be living in a cave. And we've got to be completely lucid and aware of what's going on in and around us, what the state's moves are, so that we can counter it. It's not to say we need to go and set up our own little nation states all over the show, but we don't certainly want to be subject to an out of control organized situation whereby people that have been conditioned through years of propaganda and mind control to execute on the orders of legislation, acts and statutes are actually doing injustice to people's inalienable liberties, rights, freedoms, and so we have to balance that. Now, democracy is in many respects a farce, and it's set up as a dualistic divide and control mechanism, and that's what we see in party politics and so on, that's playing out at the moment globally, when in actual fact the way in which we constitute and consider value and the issuance of value and the interest bearing on that value mechanism as being the root of most problems, if not all problems. So what I advocate is people forming communities, understanding exactly what the motives are, what the objectives are, in order to gain more control in certain facets of our lives, you know. So for instance, we're quite lucky in South Africa because we've been exposed to Eskom and the failures of Eskom. So people have been more proactive in saying, okay, well, you know, let's organize our own energy generation. And it's still pretty individualistic at the moment, but elsewhere in the world, people have set up smart grids. And I don't mean grids in the technocratic sense of the world, but community grids. So communities investing in an energy production system and then paying it off collectively based on usage. And they've mortgaged their houses to do so, as an example, or, you know, among other things, rental systems. But energy being one, people need to learn how to produce food. Now, it doesn't make sense for everybody to produce all of their own food, and it's much more proactive and possible to work collectively in doing so. And what one does is decide in a community who is going to be able to produce what, because when one produces tomatoes, it makes potentially more sense to produce an abundance of tomatoes, to plant a few more plants, and then to sell or share those tomatoes with your neighbors and let them focus on the egg production. And there's a lot of movement in that direction, in the homesteading movement and the permaculture movement and the guerrilla gardening, urban farming. There's a hang of a lot of these kind of initiatives that have sprung up all over the world. But food, energy, and then of course finance. So looking at alternative ways to exchange our productivity. Now, very few places do they talk about money being correlated with productivity, you know, and ingenuity. Dr. Kirsten has spoken about, you know, the talent exchange system, and there are thousands of platforms, and people can come to some kind of mutual agreement about what can be used to exchange value. What is our value, and rethinking in terms of what is that value, because our minds have been completely hijacked over centuries in many respects to think of value in terms of money. And I like the illustration, which I often give to people, of, you know, the black cultures and a generation ago considered everything of value in relation to a cow or some tangible productive thing that came out of their garden. Now it's all correlated with regards to money. So everything has a 1, 2, it's all decimals now. You know, it's all, a cow is now for them 10,000 Rand, rather than like the measure and value of the fertility of a cow, or the productive ability of a cow, or the output in terms of milk, or survival or thrivability that a cow could produce, you know, for compost in the garden and other things. So globally, our entire value orientation has been hijacked by the monetary system. And that's like really the problem. You know, we don't think in terms of value, in terms of talents or time, but there are these initiatives that are springing up, and I've also got an initiative that I'm working on in that respect. And communities have to actively look at these things, and they've got to get together with people that are, you don't have to know everything about what's happening, but one has to sort of say, well, to what extent do we want to be dependent on these systems? You know, we know that cell phones can be monitored, geolocation, and among other things. I know there's some things that are being done which are illegal but are being done anyway, in terms of tracking cell phones in this country and so on. And some of these things are actually still illegal but are being done. And it's not to say that we need to now throw away our cell phones, because they're still useful tools, but potentially don't get one that has facial recognition or finger ID, or don't leave it on you all day, or don't carry it around with you. And so use all these things with precaution. Living in the city, you know, unless a comet hits the earth, I don't think, I mean, we've seen like kind of the chaos that's resulted as, you know, in the Cape Flats, the gang violence and the military moving in, and now with Corona and people robbing bottle stores and being hungry and so on. But it's amazing how crisis is the mother of all innovation and intervention and motivation. And people can collectively work in a collaborative, proactive way. We can get most of our needs met, and as well as then work towards meeting most of our desires and wants, you know, the things that the niceties in life. And we really do need to look at ways in which we make use of the water that's available, green up our green spaces, develop community policing forums, and not only those that, you know, sit and meet with the police and talk about the problems, but actively get engaged in providing security and refuge to people in the community and preventing crime and proactively engaging with potential criminals and youth and so on to be contributive members of society. We need to rethink a lot of things, but it starts with the small things, as in this book, and I recommend this book to people, because it can be taken from one extreme to the other. And it's not a one size fit all, and one doesn't have to, as I said, go and live in a cave. But there are a couple of proactive solutions, and a person has to really identify, and it's not unique. This is globally. There have always been people, different epochs in human civilization, that have had this power lust. As Henry Kissinger also stated, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. And I take his word for it, because he is a psychopath, and he's still highly regarded among political circles globally in geopolitics and international relations and those kind of things. And he's one of the puppeteers. I mean, he's one of the puppets of the puppeteers.
That's right, yeah.
So when you listen to him, like him and Bill Gates and those others, they're like they're the PR agents, and the interesting thing about a Satanist is that they have to express their agendas. They have to tell us. It's part of because we co-create the matrix within which we live. So this hyperdimensional matrix and the matrix going forward has to be co-created by us. And so they plant these seeds of possibility within our quantum way of thinking, in this quantum world that we live in, so that we help manifest it through the fear and through the the apathy towards it, that it enables it to take place. It's like the war on terror. Our fear enabled the whole war of terror to take place. They funded a few Al-Qaeda and ISIS agents, and all of a sudden you have everyone else joining it, because there was a tension and there was a void for it to happen. So, as I said, this book's very interesting. I advocate people learning self-reliance skills, and they're not trying to do everything. And there's stacks of self-reliance stuff. I mean, it's amazing in like the alternative farming and gardening. I mean, there's solutions coming out like all the time of people looking at self-reliance and food provision and so on. And when people just start at the small things, it's amazing what happens. And Bill Mollison stated back in the 90s, he said people need to move away from the activity of consumption to one of production. And that's World War II mentality, and that's what it is. It's about people reasserting their co-creative responsibility to create and beautify the world around us, to create edible landscapes, to create places where we want to live and that are great to live in. And as I said, it's a great book, and we're not sure what the future holds. It's not necessarily going to be all dire. I think it's going to be a co-creative process, and we've got to be part of that process.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Pete. We got a few seconds left, so I think we'll catch up again on the other side of this of the session.